Hey Rich, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Not bad, not bad. Long time no speak. We've had a few things happening that have been conflicts for us, but back again for another conversation.
Yeah, it's been busy, but all good. Surviving what I hope is not the only summer we have this year.
Hopefully not, hopefully not. So what's been on your mind?
I the big thing I think for me, or something that has sort of crossed my mind, I am surrounded by lots of people having kids,
Oh,
and
okay.
I don't necessarily get asked the question directly, but I feel like I know a lot of people that do get asked why don't they have kids.
Wow. Okay. Is that where we're going? Okay.
That's where we're going today.
Okay. Let's talk about it.
So, why don't you have kids? That seems to
Yeah.
be the burning question that I don't know if it's just like a family thing or um I don't know what kind of right people seem to feel they have in asking people, but it seems to be like hot topic. Um, and I just, do you get asked? Do people ask you home, at work? Is that a thing, or are you not quite there yet in that phase of life?
So most of the time when I get asked about my status, it will usually be if I'm meeting someone for the first time. So,
Hmm.
in trying to get to know me, they will ask questions like, are you married? Do you have children? Sometimes they'll ask about living situation. Oh, so do you have your own place? Do you live with parents, with family? That sort of thing. So most of the time, it's only when I'm meeting someone for the first time. From people who I have what describe as a regular relationship with, so work people,
Hmm.
friends, family, associates that come from those places. They don't necessarily ask, but I do sometimes get the look of, especially because now that we're approaching summer as well, the season comes back around where it's the baby showers, the bridal showers, the first birthday parties, kids' parties, christenings, all of those good stuff.
Mm.
That period is usually summer. And again, this would be people that are associated with the people I have a relationship with. So maybe their own family members, their friends that are meeting me for the first time, they will ask, oh, okay, you come by yourself. Do you not have any children? Are you married? That sort of context is when I'm asked. But I don't think that I get it a lot from the people directly around me. I think most of them understand my circumstances and don't necessarily see it as a deficit. But I
Mm.
do think in general in society, there is that expectation that you go from school to college to university to your job to the aisle. And then from the aisle is owning the home. And then once you've owned the home, then you add children into it. Maybe you get a dog or some other pet. And that's considered the full cycle of life until they go on to do the same thing. You send your
Yeah.
kids to school, university, yada yada, and that's the marker of success. But I think I have such a diverse group of friends and also a very diverse family in that there are so many different structures and arrangements. So there isn't a pressured expectation, but the question does arise. But as I said, only from the people who are within proximity to me, but not necessarily those closest to me.
Mm.
And I do, I mean, I read the articles, I can see that in general, in the UK anyway, when you look at specifically in England and Wales statistics, there is lots of commentary now about why are people from this current generation, for example, having fewer children, if any,
Yeah.
not getting married as much as generations before. They also, of course, will talk about the economic side of things, which is this generation feeling the most squeezed in comparison to generations before. Even things done socially. I read something the other day that this generation drinks the least amount of alcohol.
Yeah.
And I think all of those things do play into each other, which is essentially that decisions that we make for our social lives are no longer bound by what was there before and what was expected of you before. It's more so looking at, does this make sense for me right now and into the future? I think if I compare to, I won't even go as far as my parents' generation. I'll say some of my older cousins, so that's first cousins and second cousins, how they made decisions wasn't looking as far into the future as we do. It's just a thing of, okay, let's just have a kid because we're together. Let's get married because we like each other. Let's buy this house because we're together and like each other and we're married. Whereas with our generation, I think we're thinking a little bit more long term and we're saying, okay, can we actually afford this? What does life look like once we make this decision, which you can't turn back? And in some ways, I think having a lot of information can actually lead to indecision. Whereas the risk, the attitude and approach to taking risks is a lot different today because we have so much information. And also, we have too many alternatives that we can see. I don't know whether that's a good or a bad thing, but I think that generally is part of the reasons why we are where we are today. But why I don't have kids, the simple answer is because I don't. To me, a child or children make sense in a very specific circumstance, and I'm not willing to deviate from that. For example, I have a certain perspective and attitude towards intimate relationships. There are things that I won't necessarily waver on in terms of expectations, and so then that will ultimately lead to specific decisions that I would make it within relationships. And that is, I'm not just going to date and go on to marry someone just because they want to date and marry me. Whereas in the past, it was often, okay, the first few people that want to marry you or express interest. I come from a cultural background, so my family is originally from Uganda, and one of those, there are lots of customs that you follow when you go down the formal route of getting married, and all of those steps that were taken with reason. A lot of it was having your family involved in your decision making, so you had to go through different family members before a marriage was approved. And if you think of it like a contract, you have your invitation to treat, you have offer, you have acceptance, and then you have an agreement. And a lot of the customs do mirror that. And I say all of that to say is, even though I perhaps wouldn't follow every single traditional or cultural route, I do think the premise of those decisions being laid out that way is so that you don't make a mistake in your own decision making. I think who you choose to spend the rest of your life with is probably the single biggest decision that you probably make in your life, because all other decisions you can kind of rescind. But who you choose to spend the rest of your life with, yes, there are things like divorce out there, but once you start thinking about producing children, that you can't take that back. So for me, I don't take that decision lightly, and that's essentially why I haven't. Is there are sets of circumstances that need to be met as a minimum for me before I would go down that route. And the other thing, we were talking, I can't remember when we were talking about it, maybe on one of our trips, and I often hear from people that, oh, I wish I'd had my children a bit later, or I wish I had my children earlier, or I wish I had gotten married later, or I wish I had gotten married earlier. And to me, I think to have those feelings or that approach to decisions that you've made in your life, to me says that it didn't matter who was in that position, the timing mattered more to you. Whereas for me, I care more on the opposite. I care about who is in that position as opposed to the timing of it. Because that is one area that, yes, there are things that you can do to put yourself out there and make yourself available. But for the most part, you don't have control over who is in, the time that person comes along.
Yeah.
But you have control over who you allow to be in that position. So if you're saying that you've met, the one or my partner for life,
Yeah.
but then you say to yourself, oh, I actually could have had my kids earlier. Okay, so who would the kids have been with? So not
Yeah.
this one that you the one. So are they actually the one, or are they just who was there at the time that you thought it's the time to do it? You know,
the baby
so
making machine of the time.
yeah, it's it's an I mean, everybody has the right to approach life in their own way, but for me, it's not so much the timing; it's the person that I care most
Yeah.
about. The same when it comes to decisions on where I'm going to live. I think these are quite significant decisions that have a knock-on effect on so many other areas of your life. So it makes sense to take your time and figure out what it is that you need
Yeah.
today, and then also in the long term before you make such a big commitment. So for me, I don't necessarily see children as the be all and end all of life. If it is so in the plans that I don't ever become a mother, at least by birth anyway, I don't necessarily think that that would mean I've lost a significant part of the life experience. When I
Yeah.
think about my own upbringing, there are countless numbers of people who have had a very meaningful impact on my life who were not my biological parents,
Mm-hmm.
and also who have had a very meaningful impact on myself and my cousins, for example, and they didn't have children of their own, but they were a figure in our lives. So I think there are multiple ways that you can add value to the younger generation outside of birthing children. So yeah, long-winded, but that's how I think of it.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. I mean, I obviously am only one half of the equation when it comes down to procreation, and um, in my circumstances, obviously, is not necessarily straightforward. I've always been adamant that I'd never have children because,
I remember.
you know, if I'm earning money, then I'm going to spend the money I earn. And I look at it from a purely economic point of view, because if I wanted to have children, there would be an economic cost to
Yeah,
that, and I
yeah.
would, probably then look at, cost benefit analysis of, is this right?
Oh
I'm not having
no.
children to be. If I want to have children, it would be to create a family and a loving environment, and I don't necessarily think you need to do that. You create that by having children. I think there are lots of children out there that are that would
In need.
be are in need of a loving home, and I
Mm,
don't necessarily think procreation is the only way to create a loving environment.
absolutely.
Um, and yeah, I think personally, it's never really been something like I wouldn't say that broody is probably a sort of a strong statement. There are friends of mine that have had children, and I look at them, and they are wonderful human beings,
Mm,
and I love the time that I get to spend with them. But I don't come away and like, oh, yeah, this is it, right? This is going to
I
complete my life. Like,
know.
this is me. This is going to complete this level of life, or this, in the game of life. I'm going to evolve into the next thing, because I can give them back. I don't have to worry about all of the other bits and bobs that come with having a child. I'm not quite sure. I've always wanted a dog. I haven't even got that far because that's too much of a commitment. So yeah, it is weird. I think when you look at, yes, statistically, we are having fewer people are having less children, and that's that. I think there are various reasons why people are enjoying their lives. I think is often a statement you hear from the manosphere of why they aren't having children, and I think that should apply to everyone. I think there's a huge economic issue for people wanting to start families. There's a housing
Yeah.
crisis. People don't live um, in protected environments so that they can raise their children. There's at one point there was probably an access to education issue, but now schools are desperate for people to enroll because obviously the birth rate is falling off
Declining.
off
Isn't it
a
in, I think it's Tower Hamlets where they closed a few primary schools for that reason. The
yeah,
birth
they
rate had just
are.
declined so much.
I mean, Tam is probably a prime example of where like your socioeconomic environment has an impact on raising children because you are essentially outpriced in accommodation because it's developed into and over gentrified to a degree. Um, and if you're not able to sustain that lifestyle, you either have to move out of your environment, move out of the place that you call home, or not do the things that you want to do. And I think with Tower Hamlets is that it has become it's a borough of extreme poverty but extreme wealth. Um, and yes, schools are dwindling in uh, in pupil numbers, which then in turn has a knock-on effect because obviously funding is linked to how many pupils you have on roll. So it kind of the knock-on effect is there, but I also don't necessarily think that it. I mean, I guess a declining birth rate is bad for many things, but also I don't think the pressure exists. We're not the pressure to procreate for our economic workforce isn't the same as it was 100, 150 years ago. We don't need people in the same numbers doing the same level of jobs. But I think what I observe is the strain and the struggle for people that do want to have children and raise a family and the economic challenges that they face. But yeah, for me, probably not a goer. Um, I much like yourself. I think you can create environments that give you fulfillment that a lot of people strive for from having children without having children yourself.
Yeah.
And I think for me, there's the way that I look at it is the upfront cost. I'm not having children to look after me when I'm old. I think that kind of mentality is bonkers because when I hear a lot when people are like, you're not having children, who's going to look after you when you're old? I think it is
Constantly.
bonkers for people to think that because you have a child, you're going to be looked after. They're going to look after you when you get into your old age. Historically, yes, that probably did happen. But the care sector, you're basically saying, well, if we get rid of, if people have more children, the care sector will diminish. I don't think it's true. I think it's people need to be realistic. Your children aren't care.
Insurance.
Yeah, insurance for care for when you get old. Um, I'm quite open and honest with my parents that I'm not going to be their carer. I think it's important to establish that early on with them. And I've seen with my grandparents and my parents how that care relationship develops over time and how strained it causes. I think that statement of you're not going to have anyone to care for you when you're old is absolutely bonkers. But I think a lot of it, or a lot of what I kind of see, as a gay man who would obviously have to either look at a surrogacy or adoption to have children, there's this sort of element of loneliness that people associate with it. If like you don't have children or you don't have a partner, you must be lonely. Which again, I think is a generational divide. I think there is a generation previous to ours was about partnering up, long life partnering. But I think the world has changed. I think people's attitudes have changed. I think people's not dedication to each other, that's the wrong one. I think people have become more fluid in how they live their lives. But also I think there is a rise of the importance of having someone to live with, because the single tax is astronomical. And I have to say, as someone who has spent much of my adult life as a single man, I only seem to become interesting to extended family when I was in a relationship, and that for me was like the weirdest thing, because no one was really that interested in what I've been doing, how business is doing, how much the other aspects of my life are. But as soon as you're like, oh, this is my partner,
I'm seeing someone.
they are like, oh, that's wonderful. I knew your time would come, and it's like,
oh wow,
that's kind of not how I see a relationship. But I think again, it's a generational attitude of that's the expected course. But I think more and more people are deviating from that and finding their own paths that don't necessarily require or don't follow the tradition of graduation, partner, house, kids, pets, all of that lovely
picture.
bundle of nuclear family, because it just doesn't exist anymore to the same degree. And I think even when you do have that, this isn't the traditional family values thing that's often rammed from certain corners of the tabloid press. Those values, that this whole sort of men at work, mums at home, raising children, I think is a very, very privileged position to be in the 21st century, because it's hard out there. Economically, everyone is challenged, and I think if you're really thinking about raising a family, it'd have to be in a dual income household. But it's not for me at this moment in life.
There's a growing number of dinks out there, dual income, no kids, and even those dual income households are feeling the squeeze. Something that you mentioned made me think about the community side of things associated with having children. So I remember when you said grandparents, I just thought back to my own. So my maternal grandmother is the only grandparent I met. The others died before I was born. And I just remember her house was full of us first cousins. And she had such a pivotal role in our lives. And then I had my great aunt, who was my maternal grandfather's younger sister. She had a pivotal role in our lives. Us cousins always at her house, and we had a great time playing with each other. And she was, of course, our caregiver at the time. And that sense of community, part of what enabled that was we lived within close proximity to one another. So we were all of our homes were 30 minutes maximum from each other. And then there were a few other extended cousins who were maybe another hour or so. But for the most part, we lived within driving distance of each other. And that was how we were able to see each other. That was how our parents were able to get support with things like childcare. School pickup was mainly done through childminders. It didn't cost nearly as much as it costs today. But what the childminder couldn't do, there was always another family member that could step in. And when I think of today, lots of people, as they're choosing where they're going to live long term, it is becoming further and further apart from one another. So those that community aspect of the support of raising children is getting lost, mainly because of that economic side. The main reason why people are moving so far from each other is purely because of economics, whether it's moving closer to the job or moving somewhere that has more affordable housing. And that in turn then means you're having to rely on paid support. My friends and family members who pay for things like nursery, daycares, childminders, all of those bills add up so much. And that social side of having children, I can see how it can become more and more isolating. And then you have to start thinking about what effect that could have on your overall well-being and health. And so these aren't decisions that I take lightly. Just like what you said, of when you spend time with the people who have the thing that you're being told is a deficit in your own life, and there's pretty much nobody that I leave and I think, oh yes, that's exactly what I need. I know that that's exactly what I want. Most of the time I leave and I'm on my drive home and I'm thinking, oh Lord, that was a lot.
It's nice to be in peace
With
and
love, honestly, with love. But
quiet.
oftentimes my car drive home, I have a huge Excel and I say, I really need to make sure that I'm thinking about all these different potential circumstances that I could find myself in. And yes, you can't plan everything, you can't predict everything, you can't insure against everything. But I think I would be doing myself a disservice if I didn't go into such long-term decisions without a well thought out plan and without someone by my side who also thinks that way. And I think as a society, there's something that we're missing if we're only checking on the friend that is single with no kids. It's really, I mean, as someone that is a confidant to many people, it's quite sad to me that because someone has the picture of having that wife or the husband and the children, that people think they're okay. And oftentimes, you mentioned about family members, and so when you have your family catch-ups, whether it's someone's wedding or whatever social event, someone's birthday, and they're asking you how you're doing, and you mentioned that, I'm about to get married, or we've got another kid. People say, oh, that's so great. And the catch up is always, oh, how's such and such doing? Oh, they're great. Just got married last year. Oh, great. And then nothing is ever asked of them. Nothing, you don't even think to check on them because in your mind, you've accepted that they've reached that social pinnacle of having the full family, the full picture.
Yeah.
But you don't ever consider that that person might still also need a phone call to check on them. They might still need support. They might still need someone just to know that someone is thinking about them. And I've had so many people tell me that it was the point of getting married, the point of having children, that they actually felt more socially isolated because fewer and fewer people reach out to you.
Yeah, no, I see that, but I also, I guess, from the sort of the other end, when you are the non-married single member of the family or the group, you end up, I don't know. I was invited to I am invited to a wedding this summer, and it was kind of I don't know, maybe I just interpret it as like as a kind of like a pity thing, but it was, oh, I'd really like you to come to the wedding. What's your address for the invite? Fine. And then like a couple of messages later, it was, oh, by the way, you can bring whoever you like. And it's just sort of like, okay, that's great, because I have been invited to many a wedding where I'm just invited as me because I have been single for most of my adult life. And there's never been an option or an addition of a +1. It's always just been the invite is to me. Now, I'm very happy riding solo. Like, I'm happy to go to those events, and I will only go to weddings for people that mean a lot to me. I find weddings very overbearing and extremely challenging. Also, they're expensive as a guest, and they're even more expensive if you're a single guest. But yeah, I find that there's always this sort of undertone when you are on your own. In my experience of, you kind of, there's an element of like pity around it. And it's like, oh, we'll sit you with some good people because you're coming on. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, that's great. like, I get a little bit socially awkward, but I also don't need to be looked after. I'm an adult, I can function.
Yeah.
So I just don't know that there is just this weird thing about, I don't know, maybe I just feel it because I am the single, or have been the single person in my family and friendship groups, and even within my work colleagues for so long,
Yeah,
that
that's
you
another one.
kind of, I don't know, like, I don't have a problem going to dinner with five people going to dinner, and that I'm the person that turns up on my own. Because that is another prime example where, like, I've been invited to work things before, and it's like, oh, we'll do like, husbands and partners and wives as well. And then there's always, guarantee you, and it comes from a place of like love, but there's always a comment of like, oh, Rich, you can bring a friend if you like. And it's just kind of like, I don't need to bring a
I don't need
friend.
to. Yeah,
Like,
I know.
and I don't necessarily want to bring a friend, because then it's like, I've got someone that I've got to introduce, I've got to make sure they're okay. Whereas, like, I have met all of the other people around the table.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it to a degree, but most of my sort of reserve about that is like, it almost implies that you need to have someone to take to these things. And it's just like, I can have a good time. I'm comfortable and confident enough. Don't get me wrong, I think there are people out there that would appreciate, like, if you're not in a relationship, to take a friend. But I think, if you are inviting single people to a couples event, just be very mindful of how you phrase how you can
The
bring someone,
invite.
because
That's so interesting. Yeah, because actually, now you've said it, when okay, so this again goes back to how I am treated by those in my immediate family and family circle and social circle. Every single one of my friends and cousins who are married or in long-term relationships, the only change really in our relationship is that there are times that we will go out, the three of us. So that's
yeah,
them plus their wife or husband. And I quite like it because I always find I'm really privileged in this. Most of the people around me, whoever they end up marrying, I end up liking them a lot as well. So it's just an extra friend. So
yeah,
we'll go and do stuff as the three of us. The ones with children, we'll still have our one-to-one social time, but we'll also do stuff where it's me plus their family. And not you saying that has given me a new appreciation for the fact that none of them have ever said, "Do you want to bring it?" They will. They know that at the point that there's someone I want to bring along, I'll be the one to volunteer. That, do you mind if I bring
yeah.
X and Y person? But for the most part, there have been no changes to my social group in or my social life, in the sense that I suppose the only thing that expands is now there are kids activities that we now do. And
Mm,
sometimes I really enjoy those as well. They're quite fun because it brings a child out in you. You don't have to be so serious. You're running up and down. You're doing different activities, and it's quite enjoyable to me. I like spending time with children, and I don't necessarily see there as an issue. But all of what you've described is other people having issue. It's not that you have an issue. It's other people sometimes just look at you and can't imagine how it is that you're self-sufficient. They can't imagine how you're able to look after yourself without
mm.
being partnered. And that is more about how they look at life and coping in life versus anything that you're doing or you having any particular deficit. But
I, there is there is, I can't even remember the lady's name. It was a work dinner I went on a few years ago, before COVID actually, so a good few years ago now. And it was like work people and partners. And I was a contractor at the time, and I didn't have a partner, so I went on my own. And she turned up on her own, riding solo, turned up, like life and soul of the party. And then I think when we were having dinner,
oh,
someone turned around and was like, "Oh, so where's, I don't know, Dave, your husband, tonight?" And she literally just turned around and said, "Well, I don't know, I'm not his mother." She's like, "We keep, like, yes, we're married, but we can socialize separately. And I have never seen a table of people like just shut down like so quickly, because she was just so forthright and so right in the fact that just because you are married does not necessarily guarantee you an automatic invite or pass to someone's event. She was like, well, no, we're all out tonight. I didn't need him to come. And I just, that dynamic, I don't know, it was refreshing, because I've never heard of anyone with such confidence since, and I'd never seen it before. So if you're out there and you remember that dinner, you know, you are my idol. Such confidence and forthrightness to correct people of their assumption that because you're married you can only be allowed out with your husband, I think is archaic.
That's so funny. So what's the moral of the story then? Why don't you have kids? Or maybe the question is, don't ask the question. The answer is rather don't ask the question.
Actually, you know, that particular question is for some people a really difficult one to answer, because I know we've spoken about our individual circumstances and financial circumstances, but there's a whole host of other reasons why people may not have children, and that might not always be out of choice. But also it's actually just none of your business, really. You know, I don't ask people because, I mean, if I'm honest, I genuinely don't really care. That's, you know, they choose to sacrifice a good 8 hours of sleep every night for the first 2 or 3 years of their child's life. That's their business. And that's not because I don't care from a point of I don't care about their lives, but that part of their life is actually really none of my business. You know, I've had friends who have really struggled to have children, and I know the pain and the resource that is required, both, you know, financially, physically, and mentally, for a couple to go through that process. So what I think a lot of people see as a really harmless question, actually on the surface, is probably them just trying to be polite and nice. But actually for some people it carries a really heavy response. And people just need to be a bit more mindful that, like, if you know someone, if you're, you know, maybe if it is like a close friend or a family member, that's slightly different. But like if you work with someone or you don't know the intricate details of their life, it really doesn't concern you as to why they do or don't have children. Or if they are in or not in a relationship. Like, it's just, we have this overexposed element that we feel like we have access to everyone's information, and that we by default have a right to know what's going on in their personal lives. And most of the time it doesn't come from a place of malice, or, you know, it is genuine. But also, does it really make a difference to your life by knowing the answer to a question? Probably not.
Probably not. Yeah.
So that would be my response to why I don't have children. It's none of your business. Even though I would obviously tell you if my views on having children had changed. But I can assure you they haven't. Yeah, I think that would be for me. How about you?
I like the none of your business, but I also do understand that most of the time anyway, the people that I interact with and encounter in life, they're not asking for any other reason than just trying to get to know me and get to know what's going on and where my desires and priorities lie. And so it depends on who's asking, but for the most part, I just say I don't have children. And if they ask me why, I probably will say something like, I don't want to discuss that right now. Maybe now's not the time for us to go into that detail, or something along those lines.
That's a very polite, it's none of your business.
I try. Yeah, good chat.
Yeah, good chat. I will catch you later.
Catch you later.
you.